drastically cut. Wait.
Before we go,
Once drastically wanted to cut defense spending, and now you want to increase it 16%. So I just wonder if you've mellowed out.
Why don't Leah let me explain instead of talking over me, okay? Before we go through a litany of things you say I've changed on, why don't you ask me a question? Have I changed my opinion?
Have you changed your opinion?
That would be sort of a better way to approach an interview.
Okay.
Well, there is Senator Rand Paul with NBC's Savannah Guthrie in an exchange described as testy. Even Rand Paul said that after the fact. It is a good place to start with our political panel today. Will they get testy? I don't know about that. Of course, Newsmax contributor Larry Elder remains with us on the right from Newsmax LA, and we are joined from Boston by Brad Bannon, the president of Bannon Communications, there from the hub on the left. Now, Brad, it's kind of interesting to see this, and maybe this is, quote, friendly fire with the Republican race coming up here, but the gender thing has been thrown into this, saying, gee, you know, Rand, you may have a problem with women. Do you think that charge is going to stick?
Well, it will if he doesn't change his behavior. This is the second time he's been on a national show with a female journalist and patronized her and talked over her. The first time was on CNBC with one of their female reporters. And he sounds very condescending. He sounds very patronizing. And the thing that he has to remember, if you look at the Today Show audience, the people who watch the Today Show are overwhelmingly female. And they don't like it when they see a male politician treat a woman like that. So I think it's a big problem for him. He said himself he's going to have to change, and he better, because if he doesn't, he will have a real problem with not just female voters, all voters. They don't want that kind of guy who gets rattled so easier running the United States.
Well, Larry, your take on it.
Brad, it seems to me that that you're right, that Rand Paul needs to do a far better job in handling questions like this. But regarding this assertion that somehow he's got a problem with women, Katie Couric and Sarah Palin had a famous exchange from which, in my opinion, Sarah Palin never recovered. But the charge wasn't that Sarah Palin couldn't deal with female reporters. It seems to me that's a little unfair.
Well, first of all, let me say he has a problem with all voters acting like that, not just female voters.
Exactly.
But I think female voters will especially resent it because when he talks to female journalists, he comes across as patronizing you know, oh, I'm smarter than you. And that's not the kind of people Americans want for a president, whether they're female or male or whatever.
Gentlemen, in a different campaign, in a different context, this kind of taking issue with the media worked fairly well. I think back to 2012, Newt Gingrich, Larry, you'll recall this, he took great issue with some of the questions during the debates and some of the ways he was characterized in the media, and it gave him a substantial, albeit temporary, bump in the polls. Will this redound to Rand Paul's benefit if he's able to depersonalize it when he takes issues with some of these media assertions?
If the question is directed towards me, you heard the old line, JD, never fight with somebody that can buy ink by the barrel. You've got to deal with the media, and Rand Paul has done a bad job about it. He hasn't answered fundamental questions about contradictory positions that he's taken that he should have anticipated.
Well, we know that polls stay a step behind, but Brad, in the latest Quinnipiac poll, Senator Paul's polling pretty well in swing states. In fact, he's up in Iowa by a percentage point over Hillary Clinton. How do you account for that?
State totals are going to vary, but last week ABC News released a national survey that showed Hillary Clinton was beating all her Republican opponents, including Rand Paul, by double digits. 62% of the voters in that poll said that Hillary Clinton is a strong leader. And I don't think there's been a drop. I don't think the controversy of the emails hurt her a bit. I think voters are used to Republicans badgering her, and they admire the way she handles it, unlike Rand Paul.
Well, Larry, let me get your take. With her, Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think that the Democrats are stuck with her. She has, in my opinion, trained Democrats, especially women, to believe that in 2008 it somehow was taken from her by a bunch of sexist people. And if it gets taken from her again, I think the female voters will resent it. The only person that could take it from her would be another woman, and that woman would be Elizabeth Warren, and she ain't running.
And, of course, Brad has more than a casual interest in a possible Warren candidacy being there in Boston. We'll see what happens there. Tell you what, short term, gentlemen, we ask you to stay right there, retire to your respective corners on the right and left, and we'll be back with more discussion after this. And we welcome you back with a question. Do you realize that a year has passed since we first got wind of the VA healthcare scandal? That's right, a whole year since reports that we were allowing sick vets who put their lives on the line for our country to actually lose their lives waiting on long appointment lists. Sadly, nothing has changed. You see the report from our website, newsmax.com. The long waits continue at the VA. So let's continue our conversation now with Newsmax contributor Larry Elder on the right and Brad Bannon on the left. Brad's in Boston, Larry's out in L.A., and this is not so much right and left as it is right and wrong. Brad, both parties look to veterans for substantial amount of support. Why this disconnect between taking the action needed for our vets and all the rhetoric that we get from Washington, from both sides on the vets?
Yeah, I agree with you totally, JD. The way we treat the veterans, these young kids, and they're young for the most part, go and fight for their country. They get dismembered, they lose a limb, whatever, and they come back here, and we treat them like dirt. That was true now in the Obama administration. It was true back in the Bush administration. Remembering the rats running rampant in Walter Reed Hospital while George Bush was president. So both sides take the blame because we horrifyingly treat our veterans. I'm ashamed when I see stories of, like the one on your website. And I think if people really eager to fight another war against Iran should think twice, because it's fine. We have lots of brave young Americans who go over there and fight for the country, but we treat them like dirt when they come back.
Larry, what does this board? Go ahead, Larry.
I was going to say, Brad, isn't the problem that in the private sector, those of us in the private sector, we don't add value to the bottom line. We get fired. You run a business in the private sector. You don't have a profit. Your business goes bankrupt. You cannot fire a government employee without an act of the Almighty. Isn't that the problem?
Well, I disagree. The former Veterans Administration Secretary, General Sinski, was fired, and so apparently it isn't impossible.
But again, now wait a minute, that's a little too clever by half, Brad, because a cabinet level official serves at the pleasure of the president. We know because of union protections, ironically union protections, that in the last bill, the Senate Veterans Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders insisted had to remain, that you cannot go in and fire people who are part of that union within VA healthcare.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue with it because I feel exactly the same way you do about the treatment of our veterans. And I'm for anything that's going to help these brave young Americans come back to this country and lead productive lives, even though they put their line on their life for the country and they suffered amputated limbs or whatever. It's disgusting, and I'm willing to do anything to make sure it doesn't continue to happen.
Well, Larry, with that in mind, and Brad made mention of this, our all-volunteer force, in the minute that remains, do you believe, unless we get this straightened out, it will negatively impact future recruits for this all-volunteer force?
I think it will. I think that Brad is right, that we owe an obligation to treat our veterans as well as they can possibly be treated. And people that are now going over there are more likely to survive in wars in the past, and therefore we have a lot more veterans who are maimed and wounded. We need to treat them well. Otherwise, it will deter people from signing up. I believe that, yes.
And do you worry, Brad, that we'll ever see a reimposition of the draft? 30 seconds.
Well, we should. If we're going to fight wars, we should have a draft. The problem is that all the kids who join the Army are poor kids, poor white kids, poor black kids, poor Latino kids, and the people who decide to go to war, their kids are never on the front line. So I think if we're going to fight wars, we should have a draft.
We both take issue with that. Yeah, unfortunately, we're up against the clock here. We have to say goodbye to Brad Bannon. We may not agree with him on everything, but we love those Red Sox jerseys right behind him, whether we root for the Red Sox or not. Take good care. There's more.